On Sunday, the day before Fox separated from Tucker Carlson, I'm not suggesting this was the reason at all. In fact, if I had to bet, I would believe it's a coincidence. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went onto the show, the new MSNBC show, of Jen Psaki, who was the beloved by Democrats, former White House press secretary for Joe Biden. And she, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, at Jen Psaki's prodding, called for the government, the Biden administration, to ban Tucker Carlson from being allowed on television, claiming that regulations and laws prevent him from being heard. Let's listen, first of all, to what this little tyrant had to say while she was on MSNBC on Sunday.
Of certain communities of Americans based on identity.
This week, Fox News settled their defamation lawsuit with Dominion Voting Systems for $787.5 million, a lot of money. It's now one of the largest media defamation settlements in history. Do you think in making this settlement, Dominion's lawyers made a mistake in not requiring Fox acknowledge on air that it lied to its viewers?
Well, this was a corporation suing another corporation for material damages. Mm-hmm. Their job is to go in and get the most money that they can. And I think that they did that. They are not lawyers for the American public. And I think what is best for the country, what would have been best for the country, would have been to demand that and to not settle until we got that. But that is not their role. And so for us, I think this really raises much larger questions. Very often, I believe that we leave to the courts to solve issues that politics is really supposed to solve, that our legislating is supposed to solve. We have very real issues with what is permissible on air, and we saw that with January 6th. Mm-hmm. And we saw that in the lead up to January 6th, and how we navigate questions, not just of freedom of speech, but also accountability for incitement of violence. This is the line that we have to really explore through law as well. And
okay, so that is an amazing statement already, even though it's not the most offensive part. She was saying, I wish we could have gotten the full trial in the Dominion suit, but that's not Dominion's job to expose Fox and hold them accountable. We should be doing that. We, the politicians, should be using the power of law and government to be holding Fox accountable and to making decisions about what is and is not permitted on the air. She wants the government to have that role in controlling Fox, in deciding which Fox shows are not permissible. That's exactly what she just said. And if you think that that is a wrong interpretation or an exaggeration, listen to what comes next.
I think media organizations or social media platforms should be accountable for the role, for being platforms for incitement.
I believe that when it comes to broadcast television, like Fox News, these are subject to federal law, federal regulation. All
right, let me just stop there. Because like so much of what she says, it is not just authoritarian, but incredibly stupid and ignorant. Broadcast television is not Fox News. There are laws that apply to broadcast television because networks have a finite amount of bandwidth that the U.S. government has always doled out. And in exchange, they were required to agree to certain conditions on what they can and can't say. That is not the case for cable. So the laws that govern broadcast news have never applied to cable, which is where Fox News happens to be. So the entire legal framework she just invoked is stupid and ignorant. But let's listen to what she says beyond that.
For being platforms for incitement?
I believe that when it comes to broadcast television, like Fox News, these are subject to federal law, federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. Very clearly incitement of violence. And that is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
I mean, she just said it outright. that the government has laws about what is and isn't permissible on television. Tucker Carlson and other folks on Fox have crossed that line, and therefore they should not be permitted on television. It's the government that has to step in and enforce these rules. What rules is she talking about? What is she even talking about? This is what I can gather. Under the Supreme Court doctrine that protects the First Amendment in an extremely broad way, the only exception that the Supreme Court has recognized that is not First Amendment speech of the kind she's describing is in the case of Brandenburg versus Ohio. And in that case, that was a case where a leader of the Ku Klux Klan stood up in a speech and vowed on behalf of the Ku Klux Klan that violence might become justifiable if leaders continue to act against white people. He was prosecuted on the grounds that it was terrorist speech or supporting violence, and the Supreme Court in Brandenburg rejected that prosecution, overturned it, and said that you're even allowed to advocate violence under the First Amendment. That is protected speech. That, after all, is how our revolution started, by people saying the British crown has become so repressive that violence is justifiable. You're allowed to say that, to advocate the abstract justifiability of violence. The only thing you can't do is the imminent incitement of violence. And by that, the court means you're on a street corner with a mob gathered, and you tell the mob, go burn down that house, where you're basically instructing them imminently within the next few minutes to go and burn down that house, to go and use violence. That's the only exception the Brandenburg court carved out. And she's trying to say Tucker is within that, and other Fox hosts are within that, where they're imminently inciting violence because she knows someone told her that's the phrase you have to invoke in order to justify censorship. When has Tucker Carlson ever imminently incited violence in his life? And the fact that she's sitting here calling on the government, the Biden administration, to ban adversary media, arguing that the only conservative network in the country should be banned by the government, makes her and the people who follow her as authoritarian and tyrannical and fascist and whatever other cliched words you want to use to describe that as anyone in this country. If you're at the point where you're demanding that the government ban adversarial oppositional media, there is no faction more authoritarian than that, and no political figure more authoritarian than hers. And I just want to be clear that this is the extremely defining standard view of left liberal politics in America. She has not said anything aberrational or unusual or out of the ordinary for left liberal politics, which is why not a single left liberal media figure, not a single one of her prominent followers have stood up and objected, because they agree with her. They support state corporate censorship. We just showed you this amazing video from the time that Matt Taibbi testified about the Twitter files, which, as you recall, showed the collaboration between the U.S. security state on the one hand, the CIA, Homeland Security, and the CIA and the FBI colluding with big tech to censor the internet. So it's the classic fascist collusion of the union of state and corporate power to censor the internet in alignment with the same goals. And many members of that committee on the Democratic side explicitly defended the corporate state censorship regime. Here is Colin Allred from Texas, the Democrat from Texas, telling Matt Taibbi that we should be grateful that the CIA and Homeland Security is working with big tech to censor the internet because it's for our own good and they mean well. Listen to what he said.
We live in an information age where malign actors do want to use social media to influence our elections, both big, the ones that you've spent a lot of time talking about, and small, like mine.
Mr. Congressman,
and it should be a bipartisan goal. No, you don't get to ask questions here.
Okay.
It should be a bipartisan goal to ensure that Americans and only Americans determine the outcome of our elections, not fear-mongering. And I hope that you can actually take this with you, because I honestly hope that you will grapple with this. That it may be possible that if we can take off the tinfoil hat, that there's not a vast conspiracy, but that ordinary folks and national security agencies responsible for our security are trying their best to find a way to make sure that our online discourse doesn't get people hurt or see our democracy undermined. And that the very rights that you think they're trying to undermine, they may be trying to protect.
I mean, that's just it in the nutshell. He's saying we should be grateful to the CIA and Homeland Security for censoring the internet because they're only doing it to protect us and protect our democracy. You can't get a more authoritarian mindset than that. And that's why when AOC goes on Jen Psaki's show and looks at the only corner of the media where dissent is allowed, of the kind I showed you, and says the government should ban that media, and nobody stands up and object, it's because this is now the prevailing ethos of the Democratic Party and of mainstream left liberal politics. They absolutely believe in censorship, and censorship in unison with the corporate power of big tech. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.